Levels of consciousness. Freud's theory considers the sources and consequences of emotional conflicts and the way people deal with these. In doing so, it visualizes the human mind in terms of three levels of consciousness. The first level is conscious, which includes the thoughts, feelings, and actions of which people are aware. The second level is preconscious, which includes mental activity of which people may become aware only if they attend to it closely. The third level is unconscious, which includes mental activity that people are unaware of. According to Freud, the unconscious is a reservoir of instinctive or animal drives. It also stores all ideas and wishes that are concealed from conscious awareness, perhaps because they lead to psychological conflicts. Most of these arise from sexual desires, which cannot be expressed openly and therefore are repressed. People constantly struggle to find either some socially acceptable ways to express unconscious impulses or to keep those impulses away from being expressed. Unsuccessful resolution of conflicts result in abnormal behavior. Analysis of forgetting, mispronunciations, jokes, and dreams produce us with a means to approach the unconscious. Freud developed a therapeutic procedure called psychoanalysis. The basic goal of the psychoanalytic therapy is to bring the repressed unconscious materials to consciousness, thereby helping people to live in a more self-aware and integrated manner. Structures of personality. According to Freud's theory, the primary structural elements of personality are three, that is, id, ego, and superego. They reside in the unconscious as forces and they can be inferred from the ways people behave. Let us remember that id, ego, and superego are concepts, not real physical structures. We will discuss these terms in some detail. Id. It is the source of a person's instinctual energy. It deals with immediate gratification of primitive needs, sexual desires, and aggressive impulses. It works on the pleasure principle, which assumes that people seek pleasure and try to avoid pain. Freud considered much of a person's instinctual energy to be sexual and the rest as aggressive. It does not care for moral values, society, or other individuals. On the other hand, ego grows out of id and seeks to satisfy an individual's instinctual needs in accordance with reality. It works by the reality principle and often directs the id towards more appropriate ways of behaving. For example, the id of a boy who wants an ice cream cone tells him to grab the cone and eat it. His ego tells him that if he grabs the cone without asking, he may be punished. Working on the reality principle, the boy knows that the best way to achieve gratification is to ask for permission to eat the cone. Thus, while the id is demanding, unrealistic, and work according to pleasure principle, the ego is patient, reasonable, and works by the reality principle. Superego. The best way to characterize the superego is to think of it as the moral branch of the mental functioning. The superego tells the id and the ego whether gratification in a particular instance is ethical. It helps control the id by internalizing the parental authority through the process of socialization. For example, if a boy sees and wants an ice cream cone and asks his mother for it, his superego will indicate that his behavior is morally correct. This approach towards obtaining the ice cream will not create guilt, fear, or anxiety in the boy. Thus, in terms of individual functioning, Freud thought of unconscious as being composed of three competing forces. In some people, the id is stronger than the superego. In others, it is the superego, the relative strength of the id. Ego and superego determines each person's stability. Freud also assumed that it is energized by two instinctual forces called life instinct and death instinct. He paid less attention to the death instinct and focused more on the life or sexual instinct. The instinctual life force that energizes the id is called libido. It works on the pleasure principle and seeks immediate gratification. Ego defense mechanism. According to Freud, much of human behavior reflects an attempt to deal with or escape from anxiety. Thus, how the ego deals with anxiety largely determines how people behave. Freud believed that people avoid anxiety mainly by developing defense mechanisms that try to defend the ego against the awareness of the instinctual needs. Thus, defense mechanism is a way of reducing anxiety by distorting reality. Although some defense against anxiety is normal and adaptive, people who use these mechanisms to such an extent that reality is truly distorted develop various forms of maladjustment. Freud has described many different kinds of defense mechanisms. The most important is repression, in which anxiety-provoking behaviors or thoughts are totally dismissed by the unconscious. When people repress a feeling or desire, they become totally unaware of that wish or desire. Thus, when a person says, "I do not know why I did that," some repressed feeling or desire is expressing itself. Other major defense mechanisms are projection, denial, reaction, formation, and rationalization. In projection, people attribute their own traits to others. Thus, a person who has strong aggressive tendencies may see other people as acting in an excessively aggressive way towards him. In denial, a person totally refuses to accept reality. Thus, someone suffering from HIV/AIDS may altogether deny his illness. In the reaction formation, a person defends against anxiety by adopting behaviors opposite to his true feelings. A person with strong sexual urges who channels his energy into religious fervor presents a classical example of reaction formation. In rationalization, a person tries to make unreasonable feeling or behavior seem reasonable and acceptable. For example, when a student buys a set of new pens after doing poorly in an examination, she may try to rationalize his behavior by asserting, "I will do much better with these pens." People who use defense mechanisms are often unaware of doing so. Each defense mechanism is a way for the ego to deal with the uncomfortable feeling produced by anxiety. However, Freud's ideas about the role of defense mechanism have been questioned. For example, his claim that projection reduces anxiety and stress has not found support in several studies. In the next audio, we will be discussing stages of personality development. Psychoanalytic theories. Psychoanalytic theories describe development as primarily unconscious, beyond awareness, and heavily colored by emotions. Psychoanalytic theorists emphasize that behavior is merely a surface characteristic and that a true understanding of development requires analyzing the symbolic meanings of the behavior and the deep inner workings of the mind. Psychoanalytic theorists also stress that early experiences with parents extensively shape developments. These characters are highlighted in the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. Sigmund Freud was the pioneering architect of psychoanalytic theory. Freud's theory. As Freud listened to, probed, and analyzed his patients, he became convinced that their problems were the result of experiences early in life. He thought that as children grow up, their focus of pleasure and sexual impulses shifts from the mouth to the anus and eventually to the genitals. As a result, we go through 5 stages of psychosexual development: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Oral stage, that is, birth to 1.5 years. Infant's pleasure centers on the mouth. Anal stage, 1.5 to 3 years of age. Child's pleasure focuses on the anus. Phallic stage. Child's pleasure focuses on the genitals at the age of 3 to 6 years. Latency stage, 6 years till puberty. Child represses sexual interests and develops social and intellectual skills. Genital stage, a time of sexual reawakening. Source of sexual pleasure becomes someone outside the family. This stage is one of the longest duration, till puberty onwards. As claimed by Freud, it is determined by the way we resolve conflicts between sources of pleasure at each stage and the demands of reality. Personality is determined by the conflicts and their resolutions. Freud's theory has been significantly revised by a number of psychoanalytic theorists. Many of today's psychoanalytic theorists maintain that Freud overemphasized sexual instincts. They place more emphasis on cultural experiences as determinant of an individual's development. Unconscious thought remains a central theme, but thought plays a greater role than Freud envisioned. Next, we will outline the ideas of an important revisionist of Freud's ideas, Erikson. So, Erikson's theory description of 8 stages of human development. Each stage consists of a unique developmental task that confronts individual with a crisis that must be resolved. Erikson, 1902 to 1994, recognized Freud's contributions but believed that Freud misjudged some important dimensions of human development. For one thing, Erikson, 1950 and 1968, said we develop in psychosocial stages rather than in psychosexual stages. As Freud maintained, according to Freud, the primary motivation of human behavior is sexual in nature. According to Erikson, it is social and reflects a desire to affiliate with other people. According to Freud, our basic personality is shaped in the first 5 years of life. According to Erikson, developmental changes occurs throughout the lifespan. Thus, in terms of the early versus later experience issues described earlier in the chapter, Freud viewed early experiences as far more important than later experiences, whereas Erikson emphasized the importance of both early and later experiences. In Erikson's theory, 8 stages of development unfold as we go through life. At each stage, a unique developmental task confronts individual with a crisis that must be resolved. According to Erikson, this crisis is not a catastrophe but a turning point marked by both increased vulnerability and enhanced potential. The more successfully an individual resolves the crisis, the healthier development will be. Trust versus mistrust is Erikson's first psychological stage, which is experienced in the first year of life. Trust in infancy sets the stage for a lifelong expectation that the world will be a good and pleasant place to live. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. In Erikson's second stage, this stage occurs in latent infancy and toddlerhood, that is 1 to 3 years of age. After gaining trust in their caregivers, infants begin to discover that their behavior is their own. They start to assert their sense of independence or autonomy. They realize their will. In infants and toddlers are restrained too much or punished too harshly, they are likely to develop a sense of shame and doubt. Initiative versus guilt. Erikson's third stage of development occurs during the preschooler age. As preschool children encounter a widening social world, they face new challenges that require active, purposeful, responsible behavior. Feelings of guilt may arise, though, if the child is irresponsible and is made to feel too anxious. Industry versus inferiority is Erikson's fourth developmental stage. Occurring approximately in the elementary school years, children now need to direct their energy towards mastering knowledge and intellectual skill. The negative outcome is that the child may develop a sense of inferiority, feeling incompetent and unproductive. During the adolescent years, individuals face finding out who they are, what they are all about, and where they are going in life. This is Erikson's fifth developmental stage, identity versus identity confusion. If adolescents explore roles in a healthy manner and arrive at a positive path to follow in life, then they achieve a positive identity. If not, identity confusion reigns. Intimacy versus isolation is Erikson's sixth developmental stage, which individuals experience during the early adulthood years. At this time, individuals face the developmental task of forming intimate relationship. If young adults form healthy friendships and an intimate relationship with another, intimacy will be achieved. If not, isolation will result. Generativity versus stagnation. Erikson's seventh developmental stage occurs during middle adulthood. By generativity, Erikson means primarily a concern for helping the younger generation to develop and lead successful life. The feeling of having done nothing to help the next generation is stagnation. Integrity versus despair is Erikson's eighth and the last or final stage of development, which individuals experience in late adulthood. During this stage, a person reflects on the past. If the person's life review reveals a life well spent, integrity will be achieved. If not, the retrospective glances likely will yield doubt or gloom. The despair Erikson described. Now we will discuss Erikson's theory again in the chapter on socio-emotional development in carrying connection. Culture and ethnicity. So, If we will discuss Erikson's stages with developmental period, integrity versus despair, late adulthood, that is 60s onward. Generativity versus stagnation, middle adulthood, 40s, 50s. Intimacy versus isolation, early adulthood, 20s, 30s. Identity versus identity confusion, adolescence, 10 to 20 years. Industry versus inferiority, middle and late childhood, elementary school years, 6 years to puberty. Initiative versus guilt, early childhood, preschool years, 3 to 5 years. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, infancy, 1 to 3 years. Trust versus mistrust, infancy, first year of the life. Strategies for parenting, educating, and interacting with children based on Erikson's theory. Parents, child care specialists, teachers, counselors, youth worker, and other adults can adopt positive strategies for interacting with children based on Erikson's theory. These strategies include the following. First, nurture infants and develop their trust. Then, encourage and monitor toddlers' autonomy because infants depend on others for their needs. It is critical for caregivers to consistently provide positive, attentive care for infants. Infants who experience consistently positive care feel safe and secure, sensing that people are reliable and loving, which leads them to develop trust in the world. Caregivers who neglect or abuse infants are likely to have infants who develop a sense of mistrust in their world. After having developed a sense of trust in their world, children moving from infancy into the toddler years should be given the freedom to explore it. Toddler whose caregivers are too restrictive or harsh are likely to develop shame and doubt, sensing that they can't adequately do things on their own. As toddlers gain more independence, caregivers need to monitor their exploration and curiosity because there are many things that can harm them, such as running into the street and touching a hot stove. Second, encourage initiative in young children. Children should be given a great deal of freedom to explore their world. They should be allowed to choose some of the activities they engage in. If their requests for doing certain activities are reasonable, the requests should be honored. Children need to be provided exciting materials that will stimulate their imagination. Young children at this stage love to play. It not only benefits their socio-emotional development but also serves as an important medium for their cognitive growth. Criticism should be kept to a minimum so that children will not develop high levels of guilt and anxiety. Young children are going to make lots of mistakes and have lots of spills. They need good models far more than harsh critics. Their activities and environment should be structured and success rather than failure by giving them developmentally appropriate tasks. For example, young children get frustrated when they have to sit for long periods of time and do academic paper and pencil tasks. Promote industry in elementary school children is the third use. It was Erikson's hope that teachers could provide an atmosphere in which children would become passionate about learning. In Erikson's word, teachers should mildly but firmly coerce children into the adventure of finding out that they can learn to accomplish things and they themselves would never have thought they could do. In elementary school, children thirst to know. Most arrive at elementary school steeped in curiosity and a motivation to master tasks. In Erikson's view, it is important for teachers to nourish these motivation for mastery and curiosity. Teachers need to challenge students without overwhelming them. Be firm in requiring students to be productive but not be overly critical, and especially be tolerant of honest mistakes and make sure that every student has opportunity for many successes. Fourth, stimulate identity exploration in adolescence. It is important to recognize that the adolescent's identity is multidimensional. Aspects include vocational goals, intellectual achievement, and interests in the hobbies, sports, music, and other areas. Adolescents can be asked to write essay about such dimensions, exploring who they are and what they want to do with their lives. They should be encouraged to think independently and to freely express their views, which stimulates their self-exploration. Adolescents can also be encouraged to listen to debates on political and ideological issues, which stimulates them to examine different perspectives. Another good strategy is to encourage adolescents to talk with a school counselor about career options as well as aspects of their identity. Teachers can invite people in different careers to come into the classroom and talk with their students about their work regardless of students' grade level. In each of the strategy above, it could be easily visible what Erikson called the vulnerability and the potential with which the adult is trying to help the child. Cognitive theories. Whereas psychoanalytic theories stress the importance of the unconscious, cognitive theories emphasize conscious thoughts. Three important cognitive theories are Piaget's cognitive developmental theory, Vygotsky's sociocultural cognitive theory, and information processing theory. Piaget's cognitive development theory. Piaget's theory states that children actively construct their understanding of the world and go through 4 stages of cognitive development. 2 processes underline the 4 stages of development in Piaget's theory: organization and adaptation. To make sense of our world, we organize our experiences. For example, we separate important ideas from less important ideas, and we connect one idea to another. In addition to organizing our observations and experiences, we adapt, adjusting to new environmental demands. Piaget, 1954, also held that we go through 4 stages in understanding the world. 4 stages of Piaget's cognitive theory are: first, sensory motor stage, birth to 2 years of the age. The infant constructs an understanding of the world by coordinating sensory experiences with physical actions. An infant progresses from reflexive instinctual action at birth to the beginning of symbolic thought towards the end of the stage. Second stage is pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years of the age. The child begins to represent the world with words and images. These words and images reflect increased symbolic thinking and go beyond the connection of sensory information and physical action. Third stage is concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years of age. The child can now reason logically about concrete events and classify objects into different sets. Last and the fourth stage is formal operational stage, 11 years of age through adulthood. The adolescent reasons in more abstract, idealistic, and logical way. The sensory motor stage, which lasts from birth to about 2 years of age, is the first Piagetian stage. In this stage, infants construct an understanding of the world by coordinating sensory experiences such as seeing and hearing with physical motoric actions, hence the term sensory motor. The pre-operational stage, which lasts from approximately 2 to 7 years of age, is Piaget's second stage. In this stage, children begin to go beyond simply connecting sensory information with physical action and represent the world with words, images, and drawings. However, according to Piaget, preschool children still lack the ability to perform what he calls operations, which are internalized mental actions that allow children to do mentally what they previously could only do physically. For example, if you imagine putting two sticks together to see whether they would be as long as another stick without actually moving the stick, you are performing a concrete operation. The concrete operational stage, which lasts from approximately 7 to 11 years of age, is the third Piagetian stage. In this stage, children can perform operations that involve objects and they can reason logically, as long as reasoning can be applied to specific or concrete examples. For instance, concrete operational thinkers cannot imagine the steps necessary to complete an algebraic equation, which is too abstract for thinkers at this stage of development. The formal operational stage, which appears between the age of 11 and 15 and continues through adulthood, is Piaget's fourth and final stage. In this stage, individuals move beyond concrete experiences and think in abstract and more logical terms. As part of thinking more abstractly, adolescents develop images of ideal circumstances. They might think about what an ideal parent is like and compare their parents to this ideal standard. They begin to entertain possibilities for the future and are fascinated with what they can be. In solving problems, they become more systematic, developing hypotheses about why something is happening the way it is, and then testing these hypotheses. The preceding discussion is a brief introduction of Piaget's theory. It is provided here along with the theories. Jean Piaget, the famous Swiss developmental psychologist, changed the way we think about the development of children's mind. Cognitive theory. We owe to Piaget the entire field of children's cognitive development, but a number of criticisms of his theory have been also existing. Now we will discuss Vygotsky socio-cultural cognitive theory in next audio. Stages of personality development. Freud claims that the core aspects of personality are established early, remain stable throughout life, and can be changed only with great difficulty. He proposed a 5-stage theory of personality, also called psychosexual development. Problems encountered at any stage may arrest development and have long-term effects on a person's life. A brief description of these stages is: oral stage, A newborn's instincts are focused on the mouth. This is the infant's primary pleasure-seeking center. It is through the mouth that the baby obtains food that reduces hunger. The infant achieves oral gratification through feeding, thumb sucking, biting, and babbling. It is during these early months that people's basic feelings about the world are established. Thus, the Freud, an adult who considers the world a bitter place, probably had difficulty during the oral stage of development. Anal stage. It is found that around ages 2 and 3, the child learns to respond to some of the demands of the society. One of the principal demands made by parents is that the child learns to control the bodily functions of urination and defecation. Most children at this age experience pleasure in moving their bowels. The anal areas of the body becomes the focus of certain pleasurable feelings. This stage establishes the basis for conflict between the id and the ego, and between the desire for babyish pleasure and demands for adult controlled behavior. Phallic stage. This stage focuses on the genitals. At around ages 4 and 5, children begin to realize the differences between males and females. They become aware of sexuality and the sexual relationship between their parents. During this stage, the male child experiences the Oedipus complex, which involves love for the mother, hostility towards the father, and the consequent fear of punishment or castration by the father. Oedipus was a Greek king who unknowingly killed his father and then married his mother. A major developmental achievement of this stage is the resolution of the Oedipus complex. This takes place by accepting his father's relationship with his mother and modeling his own behavior after his father. For girls, the Oedipus complex, called the Electra complex, after Electra, a Greek character who induced her brother to kill their mother, follows a slightly different course. By attaching her love to the father, a girl tries to symbolically marry him and raise a family. When she realizes that this is unlikely, she begins to identify with her mother and copy her behavior as a means of getting or sharing in her father's affection. The critical component in the resolving the Oedipus complex is the development of identification with the same-sex parents. In other words, boys give up sexual feelings for their mothers and begin to see their fathers as role models rather than as rivals. Girls give up the sexual desires for their father and identify with their mother. Latency stage. This stage lasts from about 7 years until puberty. During this period, the child continues to grow physically, but sexual urges are relatively inactive. Much of the child's energy is channeled into social or achievement-related activities. Genital stage. During this stage, the person attains maturity in psychosexual development. The sexuality fears and repressed feelings of earlier stages are once again exhibited. People learn to deal with members of the opposite sex in a socially and sexually mature way. However, if the journey towards this stage is marked by excessive stress or overindulgence, it may cause fixation to an earlier stage of development. Freud's theory also postulates that as children proceed from one stage to another stage of development, they seem to adjust their views of the world. Failure of a child to pass successful through a stage leads to fixation to that stage. In this situation, the child's development gets arrested at an earlier stage. For example, a child who does not pass successfully through the phallic stage fails to resolve the Oedipal complex and may still feel hostile towards the parent of the same sex. This failure may have serious consequences for the child's life. Such a boy may come to consider that men are generally hostile and may wish to relate to females in a dependable relationship. Regression is also a likely outcome in such situation. It takes a person back to an earlier stage. Regression occurs when a person's resolution of problems at any stage of the development is less than adequate. In this situation, people display behaviors typical to a less mature stage of development. Post-Freudian approaches. A number of theories further developed their ideas following Freud. Some worked with him and then moved on to develop their own versions of the psychoanalytic theory. These theories have been called neo-analytic or post-Freudian in order to differentiate their work from Freud's. These theories are characterized by less prominent roles to sexual and aggressive tendencies of the id and expansion of the concept of ego. The human quality of creativity, competence, and problem solving abilities are emphasized. Some of these theories are Carl Jung's aims and aspiration, behavioral approach, Erikson's theory, Alfred Adler's theory, Karen Horney's optimism, etc.
Hi listeners, today we'll be talking about the topic from sociology, which is very important for us as a human being to understand in this era. This is about social exclusion. First, social inequality and exclusion are social because they are not about individual but about the group, about the society. Second, they are social in the sense that they are not economic, they are social. Although there is usually a strong link between social and economic inequality. Third, they are systematic and structured as there is a definite pattern to social inequality. These three broad senses of the social will be explored briefly. Social inequality. In every society, some people have a greater share of valued resources like money, property, education, health, and power than others. These social resources can be divided into three forms of capital. Economic capital in the form of material assets and income. Cultural capital such as educational qualifications and status, and social capital in the form of networks of contacts and social associations. Bourdieu 1986 gave this classification of three forms of capital. What were these three forms? Economic capital, cultural capital, and social capital. Often, these three forms of capital overlap and one can be converted into the other. For example, a person from a well-off family, economically capital, can afford expensive higher education and so can acquire cultural or educational capital. Someone with influential relatives and friends, that is social capital, may, through access to good advice, recommendations, or information, manage to get a well-paid job. When we talk about inequality, patterns of unequal access to social resources are commonly called social inequality. Some social inequality reflects innate differences between individuals. For example, their varying abilities and efforts. Someone may be endowed with exceptional intelligence or talent, or may have worked very hard to achieve their wealth and status. However, by and large, social inequality is not the outcome of innate or natural differences between people, but is product by the society in which they live. Sociologists use the term social stratification to refer to a system by which categories of people in a society are ranked in a hierarchy. This hierarchy then shapes people's identity and experiences, their relations with others, as well as their access to resources and opportunities. Now, there are three key principles which help us to understand social stratification. Social stratification is a characteristic of society, not simply a function of individual differences. Social stratification is a society-wide system that unequally distributes social resources among categories of people. In the most of technologically primitive societies, hunting and gathering societies, for instance, little was produced, so only rudimentary social stratification could exist. In more technologically advanced societies, where people produce a surplus over and above their basic needs, however, social resources are unequally distributed to various social categories regardless of people's innate individual abilities. Second, social stratification persists over generations. It is closely linked to the family and to the inheritance of social resources from the generation to the next. A person's social position is ascribed, that is, children assume the social position of their parents. Within the caste system, birth dictates occupational opportunities. A Dalit is likely to be confined to traditional occupations such as agricultural labor, scavenging, or leather work, with little chance of being able to get high-paying white-collar or professional work. The ascribed aspect of social inequality is reinforced by the practice of endogamy. That is, marriage is usually restricted to members of the same caste, ruling out the potential for blurring caste lines through intermarriage. Third, social stratification is supported by patterns of belief or ideology. No system of social stratification is likely to persist over generation unless it is widely viewed as being either fair or inevitable. The caste system, for example, is justified in terms of the opposition of purity and pollution, with the Brahmins designated as the most superior and Dalit as the most inferior by virtue of their birth and occupation. Not everyone, though, thinks of a system of inequality as legitimate. Typically, people with the great social privileges express the strongest support for a system of stratification such as caste and race. Those who have experienced the exploitation and humiliation of being at the bottom of the hierarchy are most likely to challenge it. Often we discuss social exclusion and discrimination as though they pertain to differential economic resources alone. This, however, is only particularly true. People often face discrimination and exclusion because of their gender, religion, ethnicity, language, caste, and disability. Thus, women from a privileged background may face social harassment in public places. A middle-class professional from a minority religious or ethnic group may find it difficult to get accommodation in a middle-class colony, even in a metropolitan city. People often harbor prejudices about other social groups. Each of us grows up as a member of community from which we acquire idea, not just about our community or our caste or class or gender, but also about others. Often these ideas reflect prejudices. Prejudices refers to preconceived opinions or attitudes held by members of one group towards another. The word literally means prejudgment. That is, an opinion formed in advance of any familiarity with the subject. Before considering any available evidence, a prejudiced person's preconceived views are often based on hearsay rather than on direct evidence, and are resistant to change even in the face of new information. Prejudice may be either positive or negative. Although the word is generally used in negative prejudgments, it can also apply to favorably prejudgment. For example, a person may be prejudiced in favor of members of his or her own caste or group, and without any evidence, believe them to be superior to members of other castes or group. Prejudices are often grounded in stereotypes, fixed and inflexible characterization of a group of people. Stereotypes are often applied to ethnic and racial groups and to women. In a country such as India, which was colonized for a long time, many of these stereotypes are partly colonial creations. Some communities were characterized as martial races, some others as effeminate or cowardly, yet others as untrustworthy. In both English and Indian fictional writings, we often encounter an entire group of people classified as lazy or cunning. It may indeed be true that some individuals are sometimes lazy or cunning, brave or cowardly, but such a general statement is true of individuals in every group. Even for such individuals, it is not true all the time. The same individual may be both lazy and hardworking at different times. Stereotype fix whole group into single, homogeneous categories. They refuse to recognize the variation across individuals and across context or across time. They treat an entire community as though it were a single person and with a single all-encompassing trait or characteristic. If prejudice describes attitudes and opinions, discrimination refers to actual behavior towards another group or individual. Discrimination can be seen in practices that disqualify members of one group from opportunities open to others, as when a person is refused to a job because of their gender or religion. Discrimination can be very hard to prove because it may not be open or explicitly stated. Discriminatory behavior or practices may be justifiable reason rather than prejudice. For example, the person who is refused a job because of their caste may be told that they were less qualified than others and that the selection was done purely on merit. In next section, I'll be talking about social exclusion, which refers to ways in which individuals may become cut off from full environment in the wider society. It focuses attention on broad range of factors that prevent individuals or groups from having opportunities open to the majority of the population. In order to live in a full and active life, individual must not only be able to feed, clothe and house themselves, but should be also having access to essential goods and services such as education, health, transportation, insurance, social security, banking, and even access to the police or judiciary. Social exclusion is not accidental but systematic. It is the result of structural features of society. It is important to note that social exclusion is involuntary. That is, exclusion is practiced regardless of the wishes of those who are excluded. For example, rich people are never found sleeping on the pavements or under bridges like thousands of homeless poor people in cities and towns. This does not mean that the rich are being excluded from access to pavements and park benches, because they could certainly gain access to it if they wanted to, but they choose not to. Social exclusion is sometimes wrongly justified by the same logic. It is said that the excluded group itself does not wish to participate. The truth of such an argument is not obvious when exclusion is preventing access to something desirable as different from something clearly understandable like sleeping on the pavement. Prolonged experience of discrimination or insulting behavior often produces a reaction on the part of excluded, who then stop trying for inclusion. For example, upper caste Hindu communities have often denied entry into temple for the lower castes and especially the Dalits. After decades of such treatment, Dalits may build their own temple or convert to another religion like Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam. After they do this, they may no longer desire to be included in Hindu temples or religious events. But this does not mean that social exclusion is not being practiced. The point is that the exclusion occurs regardless of the wishes of the excluded. India, like most societies, has been marked by acute practices of social discrimination and exclusion. At different periods of history, protest movements arose against caste, gender, and religious discrimination. Yet, prejudices remain and often new ones emerge. Thus, legislation alone is unable to transform society or produce lasting social change. A constant social campaign to change awareness and sensitivity is required to break them. You have already heard about the impact of colonialism in various societies. Now, what discrimination and exclusion mean was brought home to even the most privileged Indians at the hands of the British colonial state. Such experiences were, of course, common to the various socially discriminated groups such as women, Dalits, and other oppressed castes and tribes. Faced with the humiliation of colonial rule and simultaneously exposed to ideas of democracy and justice, many Indians initiated and participated in a large number of social reform movements. So here we'll almost focused on four groups who have suffered from serious social inequalities and exclusion, namely Dalits or ex-untouchable caste, Adivasis or tribal communities referred to as by various tribal names, women, and the differently abled. In next section, we'll be talking about in detail about the stratification system and how does that actually work, about social mobility, life chances, and all those things. So till then, take care. Thank you for listening. Hi listeners. So you know what, people have long dreamt of an egalitarian society, a society in which all members are equal. Such a society has never existed. All human societies, from the simplest to the most complex, have some form of social inequality. In particular, power and prestige are unequally distributed between individuals and social groups. In many societies, there are also marked differences in the distribution of wealth. So, if we talk about three things, like first one, power. This refers to degrees to which individuals or groups can impose their will on others, with or without the consent of those others. Second, prestige. It relates to the amount of esteem or honor associated with social position, qualities of individuals, and styles of life. Third, wealth. This refers to material possessions defined as valuable in particular societies. It may include land, livestock, buildings, money, cars, and many other forms of property owned by individuals or social groups. Here we'll be talking about unequal distribution of power, prestige, and wealth in society. So let's move ahead. Social inequality and social stratification. Now, what does that even mean? It is important at the outset to make a distinction between social inequality and social stratification. The term social inequality simply refers to the existence of socially created inequalities, whereas social stratification is a particular form of social inequality. It refers to the presence of distinct social groups which are ranked one above the other in terms of factors such as prestige and wealth. Those who belong to a particular group or stratum will have some awareness of common interest and common identity. They will share a similar lifestyle, which to some degree will distinguish them from members of other social strata. The Hindu caste system in India provides one example of social stratification system. In India, traditional Hindu society was divided into 5 main strata, 4 varnas or castes, and a 5th group, the outcaste, whose members were known as untouchables. Each caste was subdivided into jatis or subcastes, which in total number many thousands. Jatis were occupational groups. There were carpenter jatis, goldsmith jatis, potter jatis, and so on. Castes were ranked in terms of ritual purity. The Brahmins or priests, members of the highest caste, personified purity, sanctity, and holiness. At the other extreme, untouchables were defined as unclean, base, and impure, a status that affected all their social relationships. They had to perform unclean and degrading tasks such as the disposal of dead animals. They were segregated from members of the caste system and lived on the outskirts of the village or in their own communities. In general, the hierarchy of power mirrored the hierarchy of prestige based on notions of ritual purity. The Brahmins were custodians of the law, and the legal system they administered was based largely on their pronouncements. Inequalities of wealth were usually linked to those of, say, prestige and power, and the Brahmins tended to be the largest landowners, although the caste system has been made illegal in modern India. It still exercises an influence, particularly in rural areas. As shown by the caste system, social stratification involves a hierarchy of social groups. Members of a particular stratum have a common identity, similar interests, and similar lifestyle. They enjoy or suffer the unequal distribution of rewards in society as members of different social groups. Social stratification, however, is only one form of social inequality. It is possible for social inequality to exist without social strata. For example, some sociologists have argued that class system of stratification have broken down in Western societies so that there are no longer distinct classes whose members have a common lifestyle or a sense of shared identity. However, whether classes still exist or not, there is no disputing that there are still great differences in the wealth, power, and status of individuals in Western society, and therefore continuing social inequality. Stratification system. Before looking at some of the major issues raised in the study of social stratification, it is necessary to examine certain aspects. Subcultures. First, in such system, there is a tendency for members of each stratum to develop their own subculture, that is, certain norms, attitudes, and values which are distinctive to them as a social group. When some members of society experience similar circumstances and problems that are not common to all members, a subculture tends to develop. Studies of class stratification have often focused on the nature of class subcultures and whether they are still as strong as they used to be. Recent work inspired by the writings of the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu has revitalized an interest in the relationship between class and culture. Social mobility. Strata subcultures tend to be particularly distinct when there is little opportunity to move from one stratum to another. This movement is known as social mobility. Social mobility can be upward, for example, moving from the working to the middle class, or downward stratification system that provide little opportunity for social mobility may be described as closed, and those with a relatively high rate of social mobility is as open. In closed system, an individual's position is largely ascribed. Often it is fixed at birth and there is little he or she can do to change status. In open systems, status is achieved and the individual has some chance of changing their position. Caste provides a good example of closed stratification system. Individuals automatically belong to the caste of their parents and, except in rare instance, spend the rest of their life in that status. In class system, social mobility is possible, and some people will be upwardly mobile and improve their positions through talent, hard work, and even good luck. Life chances. A person's position in stratification system may have important effects on many areas of life. It may enhance or reduce life chances, that is, the chances of obtaining those opportunities or status. Things defined as desirable and avoiding those things defined as undesirable in their society. Girth and Mills, referring to Western society, state that life chances include everything from the chance to stay alive during the first year after birth to the chance to view fine arts, the chance to remain healthy and grow tall, and if sick to get well again quickly, the chance to avoid becoming a juvenile delinquent, and very crucially, the chance to complete an intermediary or higher educational grade. Girth and Mills, 1954. Having considered social stratification in gender terms, we will now talk about this particular subject from various sociological perspectives. Inequality and equality. G.D. Berman suggests that out of differentiation of person, which is a natural and universal phenomenon, inequality or social evaluation of differences arises. They are a result of association of individuals to different social groups which are evaluated differently by the society. Inequality is an important area of study in sociology as it is closely related to poverty, deprivation, and exclusion as well. Patterns of unequal access to social resources are also commonly called social inequalities. In every society, some people have a greater share of the valued resources like money, property, education, health, and power than others. These social resources can be divided into 4 forms of capital according to Perry Boardley. Economic capital in the form of material assets and income. Cultural capital such as educational qualification and status. Social capital in the form of network of contacts and social association. Symbolic capital like social status and good reputation. Often, these forms of capital overlap and one can be converted into the other. From a well-off family, that is economic capital, can afford expensive higher education and can acquire cultural or educational capital. Someone with influential relatives and friends can get good reference and land a very good job, well-paid job. Inequalities exist long ago and they have been studied even before the dawn of sociology as a discipline. Rousseau identified 2 kinds of social inequality among people. First, natural or physical inequality, referring to differences of age, health, bodily strength, and mental abilities. And second, moral or political inequality, referring to differences in privileges, and these are established or authorized by the consent of people themselves, example, power and honor. Talking more about social capital, the concept was originally given by James Coleman. It describes the sum total of relation that exists between individuals both within families and outside family, in the community and outside the community as well. Social knowledge and connections also help people to accomplish their goals and extended influence. Like physical capital, it is also an asset as it helps individuals to grow in their lives and have better opportunities in terms of employment, education. Social capital is higher where community bonds are stronger. As per estimate, developing countries are endowed with higher social capital as compared to developed countries. The concept was also used by Pierre Bourdieu in describing the four types of capital. Talking more about inequalities in society, it exists in various forms like income, political, economic, wealth, capability, and social capital. Haralambos and Holborn, in their Sociology Themes of Perspectives 2014, have clubbed all types of inequalities in two broad types of inequality, which are inequality of power, inequality of material well-being. These inequalities become repressive when they are rigidly enforced. Caste, slavery, bondage, etc. are such examples. Inequalities take the form of stratification in a society when they are present in the structure of the society. In different hierarchical pattern, inequalities exist at micro level as well as at macro level. Globally, nations are also divided as first world countries and the third world countries. Dependency theory expresses these inequalities from Marxist perspective. Marxists attribute inequalities in societies to be unequal access to the forces of production. According to them, opportunities and resources are monopolized by a few at the expense of the others, which lead to inequalities in societies. Whereas in functionalist view, inequalities in societies are inevitable as they ensure that kinds of jobs get done in the society. Inequalities are a result of unequal capabilities and of those individuals, and they get unequal rewards for that. Wilkinson and Piaget have contested this view in the spin level. Why more equal societies almost always do better, 2010. According to them, inequality in society is not only harmful for individual but is also dysfunctional for the society as a whole. For example, unequal societies have high level of mistrust, and as a result, cooperation and harmony in the society takes a hit. According to Garen Durborn, in his The Killing Fields of Inequality 2015, inequalities are produced and sustained socially by systematic arrangements, process, and distributive actions. Individual as well collective, hence both individuals and collective actions cause inequalities, and both structures as well as social actions are causes of it. Durborn has delved not only into causes but also consequences of inequalities, which he cites in the form of premature death, ill health, humiliation, loss of human rights, exclusion from mainstream social life, powerlessness, and even dehumanization. According to him, social consequences of inequalities is a violation of human dignity, denial of the possibility for everybody's human capabilities to develop. To deal with these consequences, he suggests that exclusion of the poor from everyday life and seclusion of the elite from the public has to be countered somehow. Attempts have also been made to measure inequalities, especially economic inequalities, in objective terms. Gini coefficient is used by the economists to measure economic inequalities at the national level. There are many periodic reports and surveys as well. A 2017 report of Oxfam titled An Economy for the 99% indicates that the richest 1% in India hold 58% of the total wealth. Excessive inequalities are seen as undesirable in both communist and capitalist societies, as it is a potential source of unrest, conflict, and antagonism. Indian Constitution mentions reduction of social and economic inequalities as one of the directive principles which state should strive to follow. Similarly, in most of the countries, taxation is in the form of progressive taxation, which involves taxing the richer at a higher rate and the less affluent at a lower rate. Similarly, social security schemes are run by government in most of the developed countries, which aim at uplifting the poor and bridging the economic gap between the rich and the poor. In India, also, many positive discrimination tools are used to minimize social and income inequalities. Provisioning of reservation, PDS, concessional loans, subsidies, free education, cheaper medicine, etc., aim at reducing the inequality. Peter Sounder on equality. He identified equality as a multifarious phenomenon and attributed three characteristics to it. First, formal or legal equality. In most modern democracies, this type of equality is de facto there. For example, Indian Constitution provides right to equality before the law, but in practice it may not be same as theory. Second, equality of opportunity. It is a symbol of merit-based society, but most of the societies are imperfect on this count. Third, equality of outcome. It is a symbol of an egalitarian society, which provides for equality in terms of outcome as well, irrespective of the efforts put by the members. At the same time, he also identifies the fact that equality of opportunity is often in contradiction to the other two equalities. For example, a system of positive discrimination, like the many which exist in India also, actually discriminates other and hence leads to injustice as well. He suggests solution to this problem by ensuring that people are de facto equal formally and are not denied their legitimate entitlements. So that was all about social stratification, the hierarchies in the society, inequalities, Marxist view, functionist view. Thank you for listening. See you next time.